Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Neil Martin. I'm a neurosurgeon by training, and I currently serve as the interim director of the St. John's Cancer Institute. We're here in the St. John's Health Center, where much of the activity, the clinical activity of the Cancer Institute takes place. And right across the street is the Cancer Institute, where our research activities take place. I want to invite you to imagine a future without cancer. Is that an impossible dream? It's not. A history lesson. Back in 1991, Donald Morton came to St. John's, established the John Wayne Cancer Institute, now the St. John's Cancer Institute, and began developing techniques that would change how we treat melanoma. At that time, less than 10% of people lived more than 5 years after diagnosis with stage 4 melanoma. Today, that number is 5 times higher. 50% of people live more than 5 years, and many people never have a recurrence of melanoma with treatments that were developed in part right here in the St. John's Cancer Institute. And that progress is going to continue. Tonight, you're going to hear from some of the people who are going to do that. And there are many more sitting in the audience here tonight who are working every day to find an end to cancer. So tonight you're going to hear from Jennifer Linehan, a uro-oncologist, talented surgeon, molecular scientist working on new ways to detect how urological cancers, including bladder cancer, evolve. Anton Bilchik, who is a surgical oncologist, gastrointestinal surgeon, general surgeon, who's been here for more than 26 years at the Cancer Institute, and who is both a nationally known clinical scientist and an outstanding surgeon. Ora Gordon, who is one of the nationally leading geneticists and an expert in identifying patients who are at high risk for cancer. And Nick Schork, who is really one of the godfathers of data science and quantitative science, who helps us figure out what to do with the incredible amount of data that we have available to us so that we can begin to solve the riddle of who's going to get cancer and how to treat an individual cancer, and how to study the effects of treatments on new cases of cancer. So tonight you're going to hear about methods for early diagnosis so that we can detect and treat cancer at a stage when it's potentially curable and much more effectively treatable. You're going to hear about genetic techniques for doing this. You're going to hear about social engineering and community engagement that is going to convince the people in our community to get appropriate diagnostic testing so we can detect cancer early. You'll also hear about molecular medicine techniques to assess using what's called fluid biopsies to assess the state of cancer and determine who's going to develop an aggressive cancer in the future so their treatment can be tailored to that future. These advances together are going to take us to the end of cancer. And I can tell you when that's going to happen. It's going to happen in 20-something. And the work that these people are doing is going to determine when that day is. And we'll reconvene here to toast the demise of cancer based on their work. So, all these strategies woven together form a multifaceted attack on cancer that's going to have major impact in the future. It's going to take a team effort. It's going to take scientists and technologists and surgeons and medical oncologists and geneticists working together with all of you to make that happen. So tonight is about education, to learn about what's being done at the cutting edge of science and clinical medicine and surgery to defeat cancer. And so I'd like to have Jeane Goldsmith come up and introduce our next phase of the presentation. Thanks. Jeane is our Vice President of Philanthropy in the St. John's Foundation and a fantastic partner for all of us. The work that she and her colleagues do powers what all of these folks do in the operating room, in the clinic, in the laboratory. Jeane, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. And I want to welcome you all here tonight, and thank you for being with us this evening. I'm so excited to hear 20-something. You know, we work really hard here, day in and day out, and hoping for something, to hear something like that. So 20-something, we're on. Let's do it. So your presence here tonight and your support are important contributions to the success in diagnosing and treating cancer. St. John's Health Center is a unique community hospital providing the best patient-centric care while training the next generation of surgical oncologists and offering world-renowned research. Over the decades, we have built a remarkable reputation as a place where top-tier clinicians and researchers want to be. What makes us unique, what makes our excellence possible, is the philanthropic support from the community that has been present since St. John's opened its doors in 1942. Because of that philanthropic support, discoveries have been made here that changed surgical treatment for some cancers and ultimately have saved lives worldwide. And that work continues on today across the street, and they bring it across here to the hospital for the clinical care. Because of philanthropic support, new knowledge is discovered and translated to clinical care. Because of philanthropy, we are able to provide the latest clinical trials that are breaking new ground in immunotherapy, precision medicine, and other innovative techniques that enhance diagnosis and treatments of cancer. I want to thank you because this life-saving and life-changing research is something that you have made possible through your financial support in partnership with our researchers in the St. John's Health Center Foundation. Tonight, you will hear from the physicians on the front lines who are rapidly taking the latest knowledge from the research laboratories to the bedside for the benefit of St. John's Health Center patients, for our community, and for the fight against cancer. I'm pleased to introduce to you our first presenter, Dr. Anton Bilchik. Dr. Bilchik is a nationally recognized surgical oncologist and scientist. He has shared his knowledge through more than 220 professional papers and presentations. Dr. Bilchik is the Chief of General Surgery, the Director of Gastrointestinal and Hepatobiliary Program, and the Director of the Gastrointestinal Research Program at St. John's Cancer Institute. He is also a co-lead in one of Stand Up to Cancer's Dream Teams, a very prestigious project that is looking at early onset colon cancer. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Anton Bilchik.
Wow. I cannot actually recall the last time we've had this kind of in-person contact. About 2 feet from the operating room. I have to tell you, I also love the fact that we have exactly 6 minutes with no slides. So I've been tasked to share with you our experience with early onset colorectal cancer. We are in the midst of an epidemic of early onset colon cancer. It's hard to imagine that colon cancer is now the #1 cause of cancer-related deaths in males under age 45 and is the second most common cause of cancer-related deaths in women second to breast cancer, and it is thought to become the leading cause of cancer-related deaths in women under age 45 in 3 years. And the question is why? This is unprecedented. There is no other cancer that is growing as quickly as colon cancer among young people. Whether it's related to diet, whether it's related to processed food, whether it's related to taking of antibiotics, whether it's related to stress, whether it's related to vending machines, whether it's related to the environment, nobody knows. So at the beginning of the year, we started off doing a study with 600,000 patients within the Providence Network, trying to understand what effect has COVID done on colon cancer. Did COVID result in delayed colonoscopy? This is really a test in screening. And so we looked at all these patients within this very, very large network of 53 hospitals, and we found that not only did COVID delay colonoscopy down to as low as 17%, but we were the first group to report that it actually impacted outcome and survival. And we presented that work at a national meeting in February, and that work resulted in the first prize. And we were competing against Stanford, UCLA, but it was really the first time that had been shown that a delay in colonoscopy, and this was largely because of COVID, resulted in an increase in death. After that, we looked at different socioeconomic groups because we wanted to better understand what happened, post-COVID to different socioeconomic groups, different ethnic groups, people with insurance, without insurance. How quickly did they get colonoscopies after COVID? And what we found is that people were very slow to get colonoscopies after COVID. And there was a difference in the number of people, especially among Blacks and Latinos, that got colonoscopies. Again, leading to an increase in colon cancer-related deaths. So one of the projects that we have been involved in with Stand Up to Cancer and with Harvard, and it's become a national initiative, is to see what we can do within our own community, within Santa Monica, Baldwin Park, to see what we can do to increase screening among high-risk individuals. And something we realized is that if we go in white coats to some of our underserved communities and tell people to go get screened or tell them what to eat or tell them how to prevent, they're not going to listen to us. So we partnered with these community leaders, and we call them CHATs, Community Health Action Team Leaders. And essentially, we partnered with them in a way that they became navigators. And the whole idea being that if you're going to get screened for cancer, trust is such an important part of whether you get screened or not. So we started off with sending out 16,000 surveys to better understand barriers to screening. Why would people get screened for cancer? Why would they not get screened? And some of the comments we got were astonishing. Comments like, I don't need to get screened, I have no symptoms. Or I'm too scared to get screened. Or I don't want to know. And so we looked at the survey of over 16,000 people, and we reported recently at a national meeting, and there was one finding that was just astonishing to us, and that is that people are most likely to listen to their primary care provider. And that primary care providers were not telling their patients necessarily to get screened, certainly at the age of 45. So that was quite an unexpected finding, because we thought that, that perhaps the connection would be more with these community leaders in terms of telling people to get screened. And we're all accustomed to getting these emails from different, whether it's Providence or, other places to go and get screened. But what people wanted to hear from, they wanted to hear directly from their physicians. And that was a major finding in our, 16,000 surveys. So this has now led us to really engage our own physicians within Providence to better understand what is happening to that group of age 45. Are we connecting with them? Are we doing a good enough job in terms of getting them to get screened? Now, screening for colon cancer is no longer just colonoscopy. There's no excuse not to get screened. Up to 70% of colon cancer is preventable. So with these home stool tests, FIT tests, Cologuard tests, these are very, very sensitive tests. And so the paradigm is shifting. And certainly people are a lot more comfortable, getting a test at home and then rather than doing a colonoscopy, which is still the gold standard. But the point is, doing something is better than doing nothing. And that has also led us to better understand at a scientific level the differences between early onset and older people with colon cancer. And some of the findings that we have now discovered across the street are completely novel. We've identified specific markers within young people with colon cancer. So we're able to use some of the technology in Dr. Hoon's lab across the street to look at over 1,300 genes within a single slide. And we found these specific markers that young people have with colon cancer that older people don't. It's the first time that it's been identified, and it's currently been accepted by one of the Nature publications. In this little St. John's, here we are, with a major, major breakthrough, the first time ever that anyone has shown at a scientific and a genomic level the difference between young and older people with colon cancer. Why is that relevant? Because it opens up a whole Pandora's box of potential targets for therapies, potential ways of screening young people, potential ways of identifying who's at risk. So it's been an unbelievable year for us in terms of starting off trying to understand COVID, colonoscopy, delay in screening, to presenting at these national meetings, to getting recognition for the work that we've done with COVID and colonoscopy, to the Stand Up to Cancer initiative, which is now a national initiative, and if this is successful, may change the way we screen. All this was started at St. John's. All this was started with, Michael Ricks and others saying, we need to do something special within our own communities. And we're not, talking the talk, we're actually doing it, and we're seeing the results. And to be able to take it to the lab across the street and to identify at a scientific genomic level these markers that may make a huge difference in understanding why we're dealing with such, and which truly is an epidemic. I am just enormously proud of what we have accomplished. It's a team effort. We have unbelievable fellows. We have great scientists and great colleagues. So I'm going to wrap it up, but I'm just going to say that it's been an incredible year for us in the field of better understanding colon cancer and colon cancer screening. Thank you. I'm now going to introduce to you my dear friend and colleague and superstar, Dr. Jennifer Linehan, who's Associate Professor of Urology and Urologic Oncology. She's the Director of the Translational Urologic Oncology Research Program. She's an outstanding, and I truly mean it when I say outstanding, robotic surgeon and a great friend to all her patients and all her colleagues. Dr. Linehan.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, Dr. Martin, as well. I know Dr. Martin was also an innovator in his time and has supported us in all our new robotic stuff as well. And thank you, Anton. I could also say the same thing about you as being a great surgeon. So my name's Jeane Linehan. I'm a urologic oncologist. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about bladder cancer, prostate cancer, and kidney cancer, because I figure most people can kind of remember three things. So let's talk about bladder cancer first. So when I was in training, when I was in residency and then I did my fellowship, they said, if you want to cure bladder cancer, you have to take the bladder out. And if you could imagine, that doesn't always go over well with the patients. You're taking out your bladder, then I have to take your bowel and reroute your bowel to make you a new bladder. And sometimes that recovery can be pretty tough. But then as time went on, I realized that the one thing that patients wanted was to keep their bladder. They wanted bladder-sparing procedures, bladder-sparing research. So one of the things that me and my colleagues, Dr. Twardowski over here, he's our medical geo-oncologist, and Dr. Wilson, who's sitting next to Michael Ricks over there, who's the robotic surgeon who trained me, we decided, what if we really focused a program on saving people's bladders? And you're thinking, well, how do you do that? And you do that through many ways, and a lot of that's through clinical trials. Some of the clinical trials that we have, we actually are using a vaccine. And we inject the vaccine near the cancer in the bladder. And then we use a fluorescent light to activate the vaccine. And there's all kinds of things that you can do topically inside the bladder to help cure the cancer and essentially preserve the bladder. And so those are the things that we're doing to try to help patients keep their bladder. You can combine these things with chemotherapy and radiation, but without those trials and without some of the great people that we have working back here that help us with our trials, like Bethany and Sasha, those things don't happen and bladders come out. So that's one of the things that we've really focused on at St. John's, upstarting clinical trials, trying new medications, trying new chemotherapies within the bladder, trying new immunotherapies within the bladder, trying new systemic immunotherapies to help patients preserve their bladder, which I think is a very, very worthy cause, and I think a lot of patients would agree. And when I started doing that, I noticed that there was a lot of patients coming from other institutions looking to me for support, saying, we heard you're the one that saves bladders. Is that true? What do you got for me? And I started looking and trying to enroll more clinical trials through our research center to help these patients. So that's my big stand with bladder cancer. But let's talk about prostate cancer for a second. So I know Anton thinks that colon cancer is the most popular cancer, but really for men, it's probably prostate cancer. And usually for men, it's prostate cancer and colon cancer that sort of switch positions as the highest found cancer in that general population. So when Dr. Wilson came here, one of the things that he really wanted to establish and look for was lymph node disease. So for most men, you have to take out the prostate and then you take out the lymph nodes, and there are some complications for that. And the other thing that we didn't understand very well was when you took out the lymph nodes, did that make any difference? Did it even make the cancer better for the patients? Did it make the prognosis better? Did it give them longer recovery? So we've spent a lot of time here looking at lymph nodes. Do we need to take them out? Can they be preserved? Are there certain ones we should be taking out, like the sentinel lymph node? And he did this in a very smart way. He went back and looked at what Dr. Morton did with breast cancer, and he said, can we reproduce those types of studies? So we looked at the prostate, we looked at the DNA sequences of the prostate, and then we took out the lymph nodes and said, is this cancer in this lymph node the same sequence that went from the prostate to the lymph node? Did it change? Was it higher grade? What were the differences? And then we started to map that in hundreds and hundreds of patients. And then on top of that, they came out with new imaging technology that Dr. Twardowski brought into our practice. And this PSMA imaging, we said, well, can we map those lymph nodes from the imaging, then with the biology, then with the cancer, and figure out whether they really need to come out? And we started doing more and more and more research on this, and we're finally starting to figure it out. But it is a slow process, and it's taken a lot of time. But it is actually showing us some credibility of what we need to take out, which lymph nodes we need to take out with a prostate cancer, and if you have prostate cancer, what lymph nodes might be affected. The other project we've been working on is the white button mushroom study, which I always love. Dr. T is smiling at me. So we learned that not all prostate cancers have to be treated. We learned that we can watch many prostate cancers. And in doing so, there were studies that were done very early on at City of Hope with white button mushrooms treating malignant prostate cancer or metastatic prostate cancer. And we found that if it could help metastatic patients, do you think that we could use some of the patients that didn't have very aggressive prostate cancer and see if we could use the white button mushroom? So we've been doing the white button mushroom trial with Dr. Twardowski and City of Hope as part of that study, and that's also shown excellent results. It's kind of funny, you don't realize that there's still a lot of biological and natural agents out there that we can use to treat cancer. Did you ever think of a white button mushroom? So there's a lot of things we're doing with prostate cancer, from mapping the lymph nodes to understanding that biology, to understanding where that cancer is going, to using natural things to treating prostate cancer. And then Dr. Wilson, this is a man who's done 5,000 robotic prostatectomies. He decided we need to have every technology for treating prostate cancer in our cancer institute. So next week, he's going to investigate a new technology for treating prostate cancer so that we can have every option available to patients that come to our cancer institute. But I will tell you that the kidney cancer research we've done is the thing I am most proud of. So kidney cancer has no biomarker. There's no PSA like prostate cancer. There's no CEA like colon cancer. There's no blood test. There's no urine test. There's no test. Most of the patients that come to me with kidney cancer had a x-ray for a car accident, or they had back pain and they find a lump in their kidney or a mass in their kidney. So when I came here, I wanted to create a urine test, or gosh, even a blood test for kidney cancer. So Dr. Hoon and Dr. Matthias Bustos and I started looking. And they said, you know, Jen, this is not going to happen. The genes are just too big. You're never going to find a marker. And I said, we got to find a marker. There's got to be something out there. So Dr. Hoon and his team, who were in Jeane, said, well, what if we didn't look for big genes and markers? What if we looked for tiny little proteins that established a pattern in the urine and the blood and the tissue, and said that could show us something? And they did it. And it took 7 years. And just to put this in perspective, why I'm really, really proud of them is because no other place found those same markers. I'm not talking about Korea, Japan, China, every institute in this entire country. No one found the same pattern that we did in the urine and in the blood and in the tissue. And we took this to scientific meetings and people were like, this is amazing. This is really a big thing. And I started talking to other urologists about it. And so we need to continue that research. We need to keep gathering patients. We need to keep gathering urines, because we're actually able to find sequences, patterns of those proteins in a very specific pattern that tell us this patient has cancer. So you come into my office, they say, oh, you have a mass on your kidney. You get a urine test, you have this pattern of proteins. I say, you probably have this cancer. Not only could it tell us what cancer it was, it could also tell us if these patients were going to recur down the road. Why does that make a difference? Are you going to watch the patients differently? Are you going to actually do adjuvant therapy or other treatments after their surgery? So I think these kind of things for kidney cancer made a huge difference. I'm incredibly proud of this research, that this was this institution. Thank God for Dr. Hoon and Dr. Matthias Bustos, who's really done a lot of that work with me. But these are the things that we're doing in our urology department at St. John's, and I appreciate you guys all coming and being supportive and being here for us. And if you have any questions, I will be here later. But I get the luxury, thank you very much. Of introducing Dr. Nicholas Schork. And he is an incredible scientist. He actually is an adjunct faculty with us, but he is the deputy director and distinguished professor of quantitative medicine. And if you guys are like me, you're like, what is quantitative medicine? Because even I'm not sure. Quantitative medicine really is, you have all this data that you accrue from patients. Their DNA sequences, the DNA sequences from their tumors, the DNA sequences in their blood and their normal cells and everything that they're born with. And you have to figure out how to extract the information from that and what's important and what's not important. And this man has over 9 patents that prove he is very good at this, and over 550 scientific articles that also prove that. So we are very lucky to have you as part of our group. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me. I was incredibly flattered to have Michael and Neil and other panelists ask me to make a few comments. It is true, I am sort of a behind-the-scenes scientist. I'm not in the trenches like my fellow panelists up here are as being physicians. So I want to give you a taste for a direction I think St. John's could go in that is unique among all institutions in the world. And I think I can do that by introducing to you a couple of important distinctions that go on kind of every day in the research community. The first distinction is between translational science and basic science. Basic science, you could imagine, is pursued by researchers in a lab with a petri dish or test tubes, right? So you're looking at something, a fragment of a tumor, and you're stimulating with certain things, and you're looking for certain reactions. This goes on all the time. This is how new medicines are discovered. But that's in distinction to translational research, which is actually seeing if something can benefit living human beings, right? Translational research is taking those basic insights and seeing if they have value in actually treating patients. And you can imagine which one is more difficult. That's not to say basic science isn't difficult. It certainly is. But actually working with patients is complicated, as you know, right? It's hard to look someone in the eye and say, I'm not quite sure the best way of treating you, but here's my thoughts, okay? You need dedicated physicians to do that. A second distinction has to do with the way new technologies in healthcare are vetted. So we have population-based studies and focused patient-oriented studies. The standard is to do population-based studies. So what are they about? You get maybe 1,000 people and you give them a drug. You find another 1,000 people and you give them a comparator drug. And you see which set of patients has benefit that is more reflective of the utility of, say, the intervention that you want to test. So you're looking sort of at the average effect of your drug in the 1,000 people you've given the drug to and the 1,000 people you've given some comparator to. Well, let's think about that. No one is average. It doesn't quite work that way. And yet that's the standard way of vetting health technologies. And it's problematic for all the reasons you might suspect, but that's the standard way of doing it. In distinction, patient-focused research is actually trying to figure out what benefits a particular patient. And again, you need dedicated physicians to work with patients to find out, A, how comfortable they might be to try an experimental therapy. You've got to be honest with them. You've got to draw blood, maybe more often than you otherwise would if you're treating them, to see if, in fact, the drug is actually benefiting them. These are very nuanced and difficult things, but it's an important distinction. You might ask, why aren't there more research efforts underway that go with the more patient-focused research? Well, it's because it's complicated. You might think, well, why don't regulatory agencies embrace this kind of research to a greater degree than, say, these big population studies where you're just looking at the average effect? Well, it's because it's complicated. But I'm here to tell you that just yesterday, I was on a series of calls with people from the FDA advocating for these more patient-focused research efforts. And what they'd like to do is convene a panel of researchers to focus on how we could kind of spread the gospel of patient-focused research. And you think, well, what are the true benefits of patient-focused research? Well, as I said before, in the standard kind of way health technologies are vetted, you give a large number of people an experimental therapy, a new diagnostic, whatever it is, and you compare what happens to them to a group of people that get a comparator. You have to wait a long time to find out what the results are after you aggregate all your data. That could be years into the future after the trial is done. With more patient-focused research, you can actually come up with insights that benefit the patient in real time because you're actually focusing on what works for them. So it just makes a whole lot of sense to focus on this. And again, that's why the FDA is going to convene a group. I'm going to lead this effort to see what we can do in this space to advocate for these trials. Now, you need health centers that are interested in this kind of research. Where are they? Well, St. John's is one. Or so I'm going to argue. We can actually do this kind of research. We have people that are focused on this kind of research. We could set precedents for the rest of the world and how clinical studies should be used to benefit patients in real time, not 10 years after all the data has been aggregated and analyzed in some way. Okay? Now you might think, well, what kind of steps could we take to get this off the ground? We just can't start putting protocols together in this more patient-oriented focus that I've described. What we can do is leverage, say, information about patients. So Neil, for example, has a large study that he's putting together where the idea is to, say, take a patient and understand what all their nuanced features are. They're males between the age of 50 and 55. They have a certain type of cancer at a certain stage. They have maybe other things about them that might be useful to know. And then you ask, by going through your large medical records, where are there other patients that are similar to that particular patient? And you look at the experience of those patients that are more, say, look more similar to the target patient that you're treating. And on the basis of what you've learned for those patients that are closely matching your target patient, you could make decisions on how best to treat your target patient. Well, again, that's taking into consideration kind of the nuanced features of a patient, not treating them as sort of an average patient. So there are ways to get this whole paradigm off the ground. So I'll close by saying, well, what other features do people have that make us unique, that might motivate this more patient-focused kind of research? Well, it's our DNA that's come up from all our speakers. Every one of us has in each cell in our body, and we have trillions of cells in our body, DNA that has 3 billion pieces of information in it. No one's DNA is exactly like someone else's DNA. That makes each one of us completely unique at the DNA sequence level. So if you need some motivation to treat people as sort of individuals instead of averages, look no further than someone's DNA. And our next speaker is an expert on what to do with DNA sequence information. It's Dr. Ora Gordon, who leads the genetics program at St. John.
Hi, everybody. So I'm going to wrap up our discussion for this evening. I'm a geneticist and I'm from New York, so I could talk for an hour to a tree and engage in conversation, but I'm very distracted by what's going on in the world, so forgive me if I'm going to lean a little bit on some notes, just to make sure I get all my thoughts out because there's so much I wanted to share. Cancer is a continuum of prevention, early detection, advances in treatment, and survivorship. As many of you know, I'm on the prevention, early detection business of the cancer. I would like to speak to you about a program that I started, a pancreatic high-risk screening and research program, which is pretty unique, but it dovetails with everything that you've already heard from this evening. It's representative of what we do here at St. John's. True translational medicine, from excellence in clinical care to delivering the promise of precision medicine through basic science research and clinical trials. So traditionally, high-risk patients were identified because their personal history or their family history, and a provider would refer them for a consultation. They would have genetic testing, and then we would figure out who is at high risk. But this was very ineffective. And we know that only 1 in 5 patients historically who met criteria to have genetic testing were getting it. We're getting referred. We're even getting to the door. 90% of people who carry a BRCA or a BRCA mutation don't know they have it. Think about the people in this room who might not know that they are at risk. So I set out to say, how are we going to change this? What are novel ways that we can break down those barriers to find patients who are indeed at risk? If you get your mammogram here, downstairs, hopefully you've gotten a chat bot on your phone or a link for a survey that's going to take your family and personal history in a few minutes of a little interactive dialogue. If you are identified as being at high risk and eligible for genetic testing, meeting insurance and all guidelines for testing, on the day of your mammogram, you're now being offered genetic testing to break down that barrier, wrap that up, get that information. How are you going to be screened? How should you be cared for? How should your family members be cared for? If you have a personal history of cancer, perhaps your oncologist, your surgeon has said, hey, when you're coming in for a lab or you're coming in for your imaging, go to the genetics walk-in clinic, watch a video for education, get the consent, ask your questions that you need, or make an appointment for more information if you need it. Get genetic testing while you're doing something else. Again, to move the dial on finding out what is your risk for future cancer, how can we better treat the cancer that you have, and what about your family members? You may have gotten a phone call or might have in the future get a phone call from one of my genetics team, because now we're screening every single surgery specimen that comes through this hospital to say, is this a cancer that looks like it is at risk for a hereditary cancer? And then reaching out directly to the patients to say, okay, the next time you're coming in for your lab or your imaging or your visit, swing by the walk-in clinic and let's get you tested. Let's break down that barrier so that we can get you and your family the information that is needed. If pancreatic cancer has touched you or your loved ones, then you know how challenging those statistics are. Though relatively rare compared to breast and colon cancer, the lifetime risk in the general population is less than 1%. It is a devastating disease because we almost always catch it very late stage, and the survival in 5 years still remains quite dismal. There are very clear risk factors, including smoking, alcohol exposure, diabetes, which have accounted for a rise in the pancreatic cancer rates in this country. But we have learned over the last few years that more than 1 in 10 patients with pancreatic cancer have a hereditary or genetic susceptibility that drove them to get that cancer. We also now have learned that those patients respond differently, and we can give them medications and therapies and adjuvant treatment that leverages that error in their DNA to help them not only survive longer, but to actually be cured. Patients who are at risk for pancreatic cancer, there actually are screening. People think, oh my gosh, there's nothing you can do and you just show up and you have stage 4 cancer. We have specialized MRIs, and we have the incredible advantage in our own institution of having Dr. Rudy Bedford, a gastroenterologist who's one of the few, not only in the city but in the country, who have specialized training in something called endoscopic ultrasound, an extra fellowship to be able to look at the pancreas to see early lesions, both premalignant and early cancers, to detect them when they are still surgically curable. So this opportunity to identify patients at risk, to provide nutritional, lifestyle, behavioral changes, and to actually screen for pancreatic cancer was how this high-risk pancreatic program was born. Currently, we have 315 patients in the high-risk program. All either have a family history of pancreatic cancer or carry a genetic marker of genetic mutation that put them at elevated risk for pancreatic cancer. This number rivals any of the largest academic institutions that focus on pancreatic cancer anywhere, not only in the nation, but in the world. And I'll tell you about that in a minute. Those who meet this elevated risk criteria are seen once a year for exams, blood tests, screening, and the opportunity to participate in clinical research, both that return results to them to see whether or not we can have new tests for pancreatic cancer, and also to move the dial on what puts somebody at higher risk for pancreatic cancer and what we can do to prevent it. Dr. Hoon, who you've heard a lot about this evening, for every patient who's part of the participating in this high-risk program, they donate a blood sample. It goes to our biorepository, which Dr. Linehan runs, our JWCI biorepository. Dr. Hoon has been working on the same way that he has for kidney cancer, saying, can we find an assay that really is a signature for pancreatic cancer? He's not the only one working on this problem. And in fact, this is the space that has moved the most in terms of the ability to detect cancer before there is a symptom. We heard about screening. We know how important there is screening. We have 4 cancers that we routinely screen for, but 70% of cancer deaths are in cancers that occur outside of anything that has any standardized screening. So there's an imperative to say, how do we find cancer in people who have no idea that they may be carrying it? One of the most exciting things that I've been involved with is a novel ability to test through a blood test For something, we use this liquid biopsy terminology very loosely, but it's confusing because we talk about it for cancer treatment, but now we're talking about it for cancer detection. There's a new class of blood test. We call it multi-cancer early detection or cell-free DNA testing. So you've heard again and again about DNA, that the source of all of our information, the source of truth is in the DNA, but there are a lot of ways to look at that. So cancers shed their cells, like we slough our skin cells. Well, the cancers slough cells too. And so there was a technology developed that said we can look at patterns and signatures to say cells from tumors that are floating around in the blood. If we draw your blood, we can distinguish that from your own normal cells and say, not only is there a cancer, but this is where the cancer is coming from. Your ovary, your pancreas, your gallbladder, your lung. And then be able to target that before anybody has any symptoms. The number of patients that are actively involved in this program has enabled us to be part of huge consortium. So there are two big organizations that work on pancreatic cancer. One consortium is called CAPS, and it started out of Johns Hopkins, which is the origin, sort of the first high-risk pancreatic program. There are 11 of those programs in the country. We are one of them. The PROCEED consortium is worldwide. There are 40 over the entire globe. We are one of them. So it really distinguishes us as this relatively small institution with the power to leverage not only the engagement of our patients, the strength of our research, but our ability to move the dial and be able to find answers that everyone is looking for. Altogether, there are 6,000 patients worldwide in the PROCEED consortium. So you can think about how much, when we're talking about big data and numbers, what's required to really figure it out. What's the best way to screen? What can we do? So I am the principal investigator for one of these MCED trials. We call it Gallery in Action. We have already tested over 1,300 high-risk patients with a blood test to detect one of 50 cancers. The early results from this are very promising. There's a lot of work going on in a global way on the MCEDs, and we are leaders in this space. Pancreatic cancer specifically seems to be uniquely an asset because of the location and the way it behaves. It dumps these cells with the DNA of the cancer cells early because of the way it biologically behaves. So there are a number of R&D startup and research organizations all looking at blood tests for pancreatic cancer detection. Again, different than when you have a mass seen or you're having some blood in your urine or you have something going on and you're doing a colon test, that this is an agnostic test to say, do you have cancer now before you have any symptoms? For those so we're going to now roll this study over, and anyone who has a genetic susceptibility to pancreatic cancer, we're now going to do annual testing for 3 years and say, how does this change the course of their disease? Can we find it? Does it change their behaviors? Does it make them adhere to their other screening, like their colonoscopy better because they're more engaged in what's happening? Because it is clinically available, and there are two or three tests that are clinically available, we are starting an MCED clinic. So for patients who have an elevated risk but don't meet our research criteria but want to engage and get these tests, we want them to have it in the most informed, comprehensive way. And we're starting basically like a precision wellness testing ability for patients to be informed about whether this is an appropriate test for them, the limitations, what we still need to learn. You can see that it certainly takes a village to fight and end cancer. I am delighted to call back Dr. Neil Martin to the podium to lead the Q&A. I hope you all have collected a lot of questions, and we're really happy to answer them for you. And thank you so much for coming, and thank you so much for your attention.
Thanks, Laura. That was fantastic. Well, I want to thank the speakers. That was informative, exciting. I'm proud to be associated with all of these folks and the entire Cancer Institute. So we're happy to entertain any questions from anybody in the audience here about any of these forms of cancer, cancer research in general, cancer surgery, cancer treatment. Yeah.
I'm going to try to combine Dr. Gordon with Dr. Bilchik in one comment. So Thank you. I'm going to try to combine Dr. Gordon and Dr. Bilchik. So first to Dr. Gordon, I call myself a dumb gynecologist. I'm out in the sticks in Woodland Hills. And 20 years ago, I started recommending genetic testing for my patients. This is the way I said it. I think you're at high risk. You need to go to Cedars. Oh, I'm not supposed to say it. A hospital down the road where they have these movie star people. Anyway, you need to go to Cedars and get tested. There's this amazing rock star doctor, Dr. Gordon, blah, blah, blah. See them back next year. Did you go? I don't want to. The parking cost money and, like all the. So a few years later, I had a conversation with her and she's like, you should start offering this test. So I started offering the test, picked up so many of these people that had dads who had genes. But for instance, they didn't get breast cancer. Dad didn't get breast cancer. So all of a sudden, I started picking them up. Thank you. Fast forward. I want to commend you, Dr. Bilchik, for recommending Cologuard. Because 10 years ago, I started recommending Cologuard, right? I get these recommendations. They would go see their internist a year later. They come back and they say, well, my internist said that colonoscopy was better. I'm like, your internist is right. It's 95% pickup versus a sensitivity of Cologuard is only 92, so that's 3%. Great. Did you do it? No. That's why I recommend Cologuard, because 2 out of 3 people do not do colonoscopy. And the biggest the pushback I got was from the internists and the GI doctors. Like, why are you taking bread out of, my kid's got to go to college. Why are you taking that business away from? I'm like, no, 2/3 of the people are not getting this done. I'm going to find the ones that you really want to do. So I just have to say thank you for saying that. I wish you could go to the top of the mountain, because I still get pushback when I'm recommending Cologuard. If somebody's going to do a colonoscopy, go do it. But you're probably not 2/3 of the time. So thank you very much. And that's my combined Bilchik-Gordon comment.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you all so much for being here. I'm with the foundation. I'm a new director of philanthropy at the foundation, and the question that I'm asking has nothing to do with me being a director of philanthropy at the foundation. When folks are going into these clinical trials, and when folks are being analyzed, what we have heard is that some insurance companies, or let's say even life insurance companies, other companies are saying, we now have this information about you. We know that you have a predilection or a likelihood of developing this kind of cancer, that kind of cancer, whatever it is. We're not going to insure you, right? Or we're not going to, issue the life insurance or things like that. What are the protocols, the processes in place to ensure the privacy of patients who are undergoing and participating in these types of exams and clinical trials?
I'm happy to. Oh, I got it right. Well, thank you so much for asking that question. I'm going to break it down into 2 halves. One related to research and the other related to clinical genetic testing. So research, we take privacy incredibly seriously. It is one of the highest tenets of the things that we do in terms of protection for our patients who then become participants in any research trials. The big data that we talk about is all de-identified, aggregated data. Though the information is salient to the N of 1, that we need to know about you and your journey, and we need to know your response to medications and your response to therapy. When this information is then out to be in publication or for any access, it is deeply, deeply privatized, and we do everything we can, and that's why there's informed consent. So that I want to reassure that we really take that incredibly seriously. On a clinical, this has been, for as long as there has been genetic testing, there has been fear about genetic information and discrimination related to genetic information. And so there was now it's almost old news that in 2009 there was legislation called the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act that was really addressing the privacy protection of genetic information. It's a paradox, right? Because if you know you're at risk for something and you're doing something to prevent and protect yourself and have early detection, insurance companies should be like, hoo-yah, right? The guy who doesn't get his colonoscopy and shows up with stage 4 cancer is far more costly and far more burdensome to the health system, right? So there was something that was never quite right. But these language to protect from health, from employment and health are very, very clear. And in the state of California, we have the most stringent protections for individuals who have any kind of elevated risk. Life insurance, you mentioned. There are things that are outside of what are considered, insurance that is a privilege rather than a right. And so life insurance is one of those areas that sits outside. The 10% of the genetics, the budget in the national budget for genetic education and information and science goes towards ethical, social, legal issues. So it's been a very high priority to make sure that those protections are in place. The reality of it is that, in fact, there's very little case law and very little where we inform patients to say, this is how you best advocate for yourself. If anybody tries to do something to say that you are, now high risk because you have a genetic susceptibility, they cannot do that, and you need to push back. So that's kind of how we handle it. There is no absolute, but if you have the unfortunate having had cancer, you are automatically in a high-risk category, right? And so there is things that we know how to manage and things that we do to protect.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead. I was just going to comment, maybe a little anecdote. Hopefully it's not so esoteric, but being with a couple of 30-somethings up here, I think I'm the older statesman. But so back when the human genome was actually sequenced, this was a couple of decades ago, for the first time in kind of scientific history, there was an effort that Ora had mentioned called the ELSI, the Ethical, Legal, and Social Implications. So as the research community started to understand the human genome, they purposely put together panels to think about and anticipate the sorts of problems. Now think about this. How often in history does this occur? Where someone comes up with a new technology, don't really know what its implications are going to be. Is it going to cause more harm? And convene ethical panels to anticipate and worry about that. So one of the first times in history that a huge effort was actually coupled with groups thinking about what the implications of this are going to be.
So actually, I had a question for Ora. So Ora, you said you were talking about the people that needed pancreatic cancer screening. How are you, and then you said you're testing these people every year. How are you pulling out which are the people that need that?
So it is driven by, all of our efforts now to be much more population-based for identifying a risk. Like Dr. Taras was saying, sort of finding those who are at risk by doing germline or genetic testing, which can be done with a blood test or saliva. And now we test for 100 genes at one time to say, are you at risk not only for pancreatic, colon? You might come in because you have a family history of colon cancer, but what we find is you have a genetic susceptibility to pancreatic cancer and ovarian cancer. So we look at it in a very global way. So or you come in because you have a family history, you have a parent, a sibling, a child who has died of pancreatic cancer. Having one family member with pancreatic cancer elevates the risk for pancreatic cancer in all of those first-degree relatives. Having 2 first-degree relatives, so if your parent and your sibling had pancreatic cancer, you may be up to 10-fold the risk for pancreatic cancer. So that's how we decide who gets screening, and that's when we use imaging, alternating once a year, either with an MRI or the endoscopic ultrasound. All of these novel blood tests are in addition and trying to really say, can we do things that are non-invasive to be able to screen for pancreatic cancer and other cancers? And can we do this in a way that is lower burden and higher utility? The patient if they don't come for the screening doesn't work. And so this is where we're really trying to cross this thing over. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm really impressed with the breadth of research that's going on here. I had no idea how involved it was. So my question is, what's the relationship between the Institute, the Cancer Institute, and the health center? I've got a couple of questions. And how are these projects funded, and how do you ensure that they continue to be funded?
Those are all great questions, and I think you have to look at St. John's and the St. John's Cancer Institute as being one organization. So that question was easy. I think, related to funding these projects, funding is extremely challenging. We've all written competitive grants to the National Cancer Institute. Most times they fund at less than the 10th percentile. So we apply for other sources of funding, whether they be foundation grants, philanthropy. The Stand Up to Cancer grant that that we're part of, although Stand Up to Cancer is probably the largest cancer nonprofit in the world, and they have scientific advisory boards, they have external advisory boards. So even though it's not part of the government, it's still a very, very rigorous, stringent process to go through and to be successful at being funded through them. So challenging, but I think we're all very committed and passionate about it, and somehow we find ways of getting the work done.
Oh, am I supposed to talk it too? Oh, well, thank you very much. So I think to answer your question, the dream of all the scientists here is that you get a grant at some point in time from the government, but it's very difficult. And there's lots of places you can get grants. But I think philanthropy always is responsible for starting the pilot studies, for keeping the research going. So for the 7 years that I was working on the kidney cancer project until I actually got something that is real and tangible, that was philanthropy. But now I have something real and tangible. Can I take that to the next level and get a grant? That's the dream.
I was just going to add one comment onto that. So, research funding does come from a wide variety of different organizations. So we had mentioned the National Institutes of Health, where most researchers go. That's, of course, funded through the taxpayers, to the tune of about $40 billion. So, a lot of research money comes from there. It's also through philanthropy. It's also, quite frankly, through industry connections. So many of the people up on the panel here have communications connections, funding through industry. You might think, well, why isn't that kind of shown to be a little bit more suspect in some way? It's not ivory tower enough. You're working with industry. Well, there are things that go on in industry that academics simply don't do well, right? So, for example, making products, that's probably not going to happen within the confines of an academic institution, but certainly that's why industry is there. So these sorts of partnerships can be incredibly useful and powerful. So funding comes from a wide variety of different sources.
Yes.
I have a question for Dr. Linehan. You mentioned that Dr. Wilson and you were bringing in a new technology for, I believe it was prostate cancer you're referring to, and I'm curious if it's the TULSA device or what is it?
It's actually the nanoknife.
Okay.
But there's a lot of new technologies that are coming out for prostate cancer, and so I think the way that Dr. Wilson has envisioned the department and the way that I envision the department is that we stay on top of these different types of technologies, because I think, as time goes on and more research is gathered, we're going to find that different technologies suit different patients for different types of cancer, where different types of cancer are. So if you can offer that to all the patients, and there's a lot of patients with prostate cancer, that's the most important thing. I don't think it's ever going to be, especially with prostate cancer, one set treatment for one specific type of cancer. It's going to be different options for different patients, much like medical oncology, where you have targeted therapies for different types of cancer that they're giving you systemically. I don't know if hopefully that answered your question, but it was nanoknife, not TULSA.
And do you have TULSA, currently have TULSA?
Not yet. we're still kind of waiting for more data on that. There's plenty of centers that I know that are using it. And so I'm kind of waiting and watching for that data. And I think that's what a lot of us are doing. And then there are certain things that we feel, I guess, more strongly about that we want to look into. And I think that that's where we're heading.
So regarding laser technology, is HIFU your sort of primary go-to?
Right now, HIFU is definitely my primary focal therapy for prostate cancer for go-to, mostly because it has the most legitimate data and the longest data. Whereas Tulsa, NanoKnife, all those, they don't have as much yet. But like I said, it doesn't mean they're not good technologies.
Right.
It just means we haven't collected it yet.
Understood. Thank you.
Well, we just had that question about the relationship between the Cancer Institute and St. John's Health Center. And I think there's nobody better to comment on that than Michael Ricks, who is the president of the St. John's Cancer Institute and the chief executive for the health center. So, Michael?
Wow. All right. Thank you, Neil. I was actually just like one of you all, just kicking back and enjoying this amazing panel today or tonight. Rarely do I get intimidated, but if I'm intimidated right now by this prestigious panel and our host, Dr. Martin. So just real quick, a couple things. One is I appreciate that question that was asked, and I think it was already answered great by our panel. We here at St. John's, I will just give a couple remarks to answer that question, and then maybe I've been told I'm supposed to give the concluding remarks as well, so let me just combine those. But here at St. John's, this is a unique beast, and I mean that in all the positive connotations you could think of. I would tell you that probably there's a little over 5,000 hospitals throughout the United States of America, 5,500-ish hospitals. I would tell you that well under the top 1% of those hospitals are like St. John's. And what I mean by that is, about all the academic medical centers that are out there, about the university teaching hospitals. We have a couple of amazing academic centers around us. But what you don't have, and what you may not, if you think about all the hospitals in LA and Southern California and so forth, they're unlike St. John's. Because what St. John's is actually a community hospital. This is a community asset. When you go out and talk to people in the community, I talk to people every weekend. Side note, everybody in Santa Monica, by the way, was born at St. John's. I mean, it's not true, but I'm telling you, when I'm out on the weekends, I meet people all the time, and like, I was born at St. John's, my kids were born at St. John's. I'm thinking everybody in Santa Monica was born at St. John's. But what, beyond that, because I know this isn't a women's health meeting tonight, but the point of bringing that up is it's a community hospital, but it's a community hospital that performs academic level medicine. And there are not community hospitals that can say that. Community hospitals are not able and capable to perform academic level clinical care and research. Those two together. It just does not happen. I can only think of one other hospital, I'm not going to say who it was, but I can only think of one other hospital in all of Southern California, in addition to St. John's, that's a community hospital that practices academic university level care and research. And that is amazing. And the only way we can do that, in my opinion, is because of you and because of philanthropy. That's not my pitch. I'm not trying to guilt you into anything. I'm just telling you straight up. The only reason St. John's is on the map as a community hospital, that practices academic level care and research is because of you, because of your support and your continued support here of St. John's. We actually have a vision that we're trying to strive for every single day, and that vision is to do just that, to provide academic level care and research in a community hospital that's known for a personalized and exceptional experience. We're able to realize that vision because of you. To end my comments, have you guys ever heard of the game Two Truths and a Lie? Two Truths and a Lie, have you guys heard of that game? All right, I'm gonna give you 3 truths and no lies. All right, here's the 3 truths. Number 1, I promise you that in that same time frame that Dr. Martin mentioned, Dr. Martin said that there's gonna be a cure for cancer in this century. I'm gonna give you additional. So 1, we are going to, in our pursuit to find that cure or those cures, we're going to, number one, continue to revolutionize the way we treat cancer, which is super important. So on our journey to find cures, we're going to continue to revolutionize the way we actually treat patients that have cancer and prevent patients from getting cancer. Number two, I promise you that this organization, the St. John's Cancer Institute, will be one of the organizations that finds a cure to certain forms of cancer. I promise you that. Because remember, it's not just a cure, right? You've already heard, there are many different forms of cancer. And I am convinced, knowing the people that I know, knowing the community and the support that we have, this will be an organization that does find a cure, if not cures, for different forms of cancer. And number three, my last truth that's super important to this audience tonight, I can promise you that not only that revolutionizing the way we treat cancer, but also in finding a cure for cancer, I promise you that there will be a direct correlation in finding a cure to cancer to philanthropy. I am convinced that it will be through philanthropy that we actually do find a cure for cancer. And how exciting is that we're going to be able to say one day that due to this amazing philanthropic community that's associated with St. John's, we were able to find a cure for cancer and save the lives of many families and friends in this community. So with that, I hope that you'll continue to be a part of that exciting vision. You'll help us realize that vision. You'll help us to participate in that revolutionizing the way we treat cancer and finding cures for cancer, because it can't be done. And what we've achieved today hasn't been done without your support. It has to have your support. And we thank you for being a part of that moving forward, because we will find a cure for cancer here at St. John's. Thank you.